To first-century Jews, the occupying Roman forces were the sons of darkness, and Pontius Pilate the high priest of darkness. Yet Pilate believed that his rule as prefect of Judea was bringing Israel out of darkness into the light. Where does the truth lie? Who was this man whose memory a billion Christians keep alive every Sunday when they say the creed? I believe in Jesus Christ, who suffered under Pontius Pilate. Was the man who sentenced Jesus to death the high priest of darkness, or was he a victim of circumstances beyond his control? Pontius was his family name. Pilate, or Pilatus in Latin, means man armed with a pilum. The pilum was different from a simple javelin. It had a barbed head. Embedded in its target, it could not very easily be pulled out. Half of the shaft was made of iron, which gave the pilum an unusually heavy weight. It was not necessary to hit the body of an opponent. It was enough just to pierce his shield. The weight of the iron shaft pulled the shield to the ground, rendering it useless. The pilum's barbed head held stubbornly in place until it was too late. This weapon became the symbol of Roman world conquest. Man armed with a pilum was an excellent name for the one who became the symbol of Roman might in Judea, and for 10 years was its governor. Caesarea on Israel's Mediterranean coast was once capable of providing anchorage for 100 Roman war galleys. This was the port of entry for the ship that brought Pilate to Judea in 26 AD. Caesarea had been built by Herod the Great as a tribute to Caesar Augustus. The statue of Augustus, taller than the Olympian Zeus, still overlooked the harbor from the magnificent temple Herod had dedicated to his mentor. The city was once agleam with marble statues, marble streets. For 20 years, this had been the Roman capital of Judea. Now it was the home of its new governor, Pontius Pilate. Although Pilate's governmental seat was at Caesarea, at least once a year, he left his headquarters on the shores of the Mediterranean and paid a visit to Israel's former capital, the Golden City of Jerusalem. The occasion was the Passover of the Jews. The Bedouin market in Beersheba is the closest modern example of ancient Jerusalem at Passover time. Pilate would have found Jerusalem turned into one vast marketplace. Jews and Jewish converts, perhaps numbering 100,000, poured into the city from every corner of the Roman Empire, not only to observe the Passover, but also to sell their merchandise. There were exotic spices brought from Mesopotamia, cakes and wheat grown on Mount Ephraim, jewelry and adornment fashioned in Alexandria and Rome, and of course eggs and chickens from the nearby suburbs of Jerusalem. To put it in modern terms, Passover was the greatest tourist event of the year, and in 2,000 years it is interesting to see how little tourism has changed. The Talmud even speaks of souvenir sellers, goldsmiths hawking miniature golden Jerusalems, so that the tourist could go home with a lasting memory of the holy city. To Pilate and his ordered Roman mind, Jerusalem at Passover must have seemed the epitome of chaos. As governor, he needed to be on the scene, lest things get out of control. At the same time, he needed to be isolated from it all for the sake of his own sanity. So he ensconced himself here in what modern Jerusalem calls the Citadel. These are the last remaining ruins of the palace built by Herod the Great. This archaeological model shows how Herod's palace looked in the days of Pontius Pilate. Perhaps the most striking feature of Herod's palace was the central courtyard where the Jews would one day bring Jesus to Pilate for trial. Bordering its marble pavement were carefully manicured lawns where Pilate could enjoy expanses of lush green, irrigated with water brought all the way from Bethlehem. Exotic fountains caught his eye, spewing water from statuary in the Roman manner. Here Pilate relaxed in his own paradise, in a world carefully removed from the Jews, their Passover mayhem, and their strange religious rituals.
נברך עכשיו את השם, ברוך אתה אדוני.
It was now Thursday evening of what Christians would later call Holy Week. In every Jewish dwelling, the head of the household recited a benediction for the removal of leaven, and then the ritual search began. Leaven means fermented dough. Bread made with yeast was obviously one of the things considered leavened and had to be removed from the house before Passover, down to the last crumb. Since the women had spent most of the week cleaning the house, it might be that no offending leaven could be found. And so it became the custom that members of the household would place crumbs of bread around the house specifically for the ritual search. In Jewish thought, leaven is regarded as a symbol of corruption and impurity. All such things must be removed, so the sacred Passover might not be defiled. Pilate obviously would not have been a witness to things so Jewish, nor would he have been a witness to what had been going on in the palace of Caiaphas that same Thursday night. Many scholars believe that here below a church in Jerusalem's western hills are the remains of Caiaphas's once rather sumptuous estate. After interrogating Jesus all night, the high priest assembled his council somewhere in this spot at dawn on Good Friday to render a verdict. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the blessed God? Caiaphas asked Jesus. I am, answered Jesus. And you will all see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the Almighty and coming with the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his robes and said, You've heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? They all voted against him. He was guilty and should be put to death. The guards slapped Jesus and led him away, bound. A great deal of research has gone into the events attending the arrest and trial of Jesus. Dr. Paul L. Meyer, professor of ancient history at Western Michigan University, has put his own research on this subject into a book titled First Easter. Joseph Caiaphas, the high priest at the time, certainly played a prominent part in all of this. What do we know about Caiaphas?
The first-century Jewish historian Josephus, for example, tells us that Joseph Caiaphas was the son-in-law of Annas, the original high priest of Jerusalem, who managed to place 5 of his own sons also in the position of the high priesthood. And he was now the father-in-law of Joseph Caiaphas, the present and incumbent high priest, who had been in that position, by the way, for the past 15 years.
Caiaphas himself had some reason for taking the action that he did.
Oh, yes, he certainly did. He was doing this really in good faith. You see, he was worried about the political implications of Jesus and his movement. Before Jesus came along, there had been 13 major revolutions against Roman authority, so that any messianic figure who attracted a large following among the people might indeed grow into a political challenge to Rome itself. And then Pontius Pilate, the governor, would have to look in. Then, of course, there were also religious reasons for Caiaphas to want Jesus put out of the way, because Jesus had blasphemed Jewish monotheism, so Caiaphas would conclude. The belief in one God. How can there be a son of God in that case? There were economic motives as well. Don't forget that Jesus, in cleansing the temple, in overthrowing the tables of the money changers, was actually attacking a concession that was controlled by Caiaphas and Annas themselves. And there were personal reasons, too. Jesus had attacked the famous political and social parties of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, called them really some rather interesting names. And so for all these reasons, they thought it was incumbent upon them to secure the trial and condemnation of Jesus of Nazareth.
Whether for personal or professional reasons, is it possible that Caiaphas thought that he was doing God a service?
He probably really did think exactly that. Otherwise, the Romans will come and destroy our temple and our city, said Caiaphas. It is expedient for one man to die rather than the whole nation be sacrificed.
Early on Good Friday morning, Jesus was taken from Caiaphas' palace to the palace of Pontius Pilate. The Jewish authorities requested that Pilate hear the case not inside the walls of the Caesareum, but under the open sky in the courtyard of his palace. Jews considered any Gentile house ritually impure, and beginning with the search for leaven the night before, any contamination, any impurity which could render one unfit to celebrate the Passover was avoided at all costs. Since Pilate's courtyard was open to the air, the Jews could attend the trial here without fear of defiling themselves.
Let the trial begin. Who brings the charges?
The Sanhedrin.
What are the accusations against this man?
In the name of the High Priest of Israel and the Council of the 70, we have found this man guilty of misleading our people, telling them not to pay taxes to Caesar and claiming that he is the Messiah, a king.
He's no king! Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him! He's not a king! We don't want this man! He's a troublemaker!
Bring him.
It is an irony of history. The wise men came to this same palace 33 years earlier, asking, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews?" And here Jesus is standing where they stood, on trial for being the king they sought.
Very interesting charges. Are you the King of the Jews?
Are you asking this for yourself, or is it because of what they told you?
Look, I'm not a Jew. The charge doesn't concern me. But your own people and the chief priests handed you over to me. You're certainly upsetting them. Is it true? Are you the King of the Jews?
My kingdom does not belong to this world.
But you are a king.
I was born and came into the world for one purpose: to speak about the truth.
What is truth? Bring him.
It was a Roman custom at the time of the Jewish Passover for the governor to release any prisoner the crowd chose.
It's time to release a prisoner to you.
Release Barabbas!
Barabbas.
Barabbas was an actual criminal, a murderer.
And what shall I do with this man? Why, what crime has he committed?
They screamed that he had started riots all the way from Galilee to Jerusalem.
Is this man a Galilean? Then he's Herod's subject.
When Pilate learned that Jesus was from Galilee, the region ruled by Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, he sent Jesus to Herod's Jerusalem residence. Herod Antipas was very pleased when he saw Jesus. He had heard a great deal about him, and he'd been wanting to see him for a long time. He hoped to see Jesus perform a miracle. He asked many questions, but Jesus made no answer. Herod Antipas, like his father, was a cunning man, more so than Pilate. He was also a cultured man, capable within his own limitations of a certain urbane compassion. He was not a religious man, and he had an air of faint amusement that often passes for having an open mind toward things religious. Jesus refused to speak to him. The chief priest and the teachers of the law came forward with strong accusations. Jesus refused to answer them. Herod let his soldiers have their fun with him, mocking him and pretending humility to a king. But Herod remembered the people's reaction when he murdered John the Baptist. He was not about to make this same mistake twice. So Herod sent Jesus back to Pontius Pilate. Pilate, in the end, would be stuck with the problem of what to do with Jesus. Pilate tried to soften the crowd's bloodthirsty mood by handing Jesus over to his soldiers for torture. Prisoners did not always survive the brutal whip. A Roman whip was a series of leather flails tipped with iron points that ripped the flesh. And then they took branches from the thorn bush and made a crown of thorns out of it, jamming it down on Jesus' head. They didn't do this to punish him for being called King of the Jews. They really didn't care about that at all. They were just having their fun with Jesus. It was like the games they played. This series of lines, looking something like children's hopscotch, was used for a very popular military game called the King's Game. Julius Caesar, when he made his move to become dictator of Rome, crossed the Rubicon in defiance of a long-standing Senate order, and as he did so, he said, "The dice have been cast." They were knucklebone dice like this with which the soldiers played the King's Game. The winner was king for a day. He could treat the losers as if they were his subjects. In some Greek cities, someone was made king for the year. After being given everything for a whole year, he was slaughtered and his blood offered to the earth goddess in sacrifice. In that case, the winner died. In this case, the king died. After the soldiers had played the King's Game with Jesus, he was brought out dressed in the mocking symbols of royalty.
Here is the man. Look at him. Do you call this man a king?
King, crucify!
He's already been whipped. Isn't that enough? What? Shall I crucify your king? We have no king, but Caesar! Bring the basin. I am not responsible for the death of this man. This is your doing. I'll release Barabbas. Let Jesus be crucified.
Jesus was always pictured as carrying his cross over his shoulder with a long shaft dragging behind him. But this was not the Roman way. The upright shaft had already been erected on the grounds of execution, used over and over again. What the prisoner carried was the cross beam. This heavy beam of wood placed on the neck or on the shoulders could cut deeply into a man's body. And Scripture tells us that Jesus fell under its weight. An innocent bystander, Simon of Cyrene, was pressed into service or volunteered to help carry this beam of wood. At 9 in the morning, they nailed him to a cross between two thieves. While spectators came and went, at least 3 stayed below the cross and waited. John, the beloved disciple, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and a Roman centurion. In 6 hours, Yeshua, God saves, would draw his last breath for the salvation of humanity. His death had been destined as the ultimate act of love, the ultimate act of forgiveness.
Father, forgive these men, for they know not what they do this day. O Son of Man, have mercy on a sinner. Verily do I say unto you, we meet today in paradise. Thus was saved the thief who beheld his Savior's passion. Behold thy son, behold thy mother, his bride. Then were John and Mary found. He thirsts for our salvation. My God, why must you forsake me? And now it's done, and now it's done. Into the loving hands of my heavenly Father I commend my spirit.
As he died, the Gospels tell us, darkness came over the land. Whether a natural phenomenon or supernatural, none can say with certainty. One can only say that at 3 o'clock it was night, and the one who called himself the light of the world had descended into the darkness of death. Scholars believe that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre covers the actual site of Calvary, where the lifeless body of Jesus was now suspended between earth and heaven. The beginning of the Sabbath was drawing rapidly near, and a body could not stay on a cross. To avoid this desecration, the Jewish authorities asked permission of Pilate to break the legs of the crucified men. This was done so that the legs would no longer carry the weight of the body. With the additional strain, the lungs would collapse and would suffocate the men quickly. The soldiers went to the first man and broke his legs, and then to the other. When they came to Jesus, they saw that he had already died and did not break his legs. To make sure that he was dead, a soldier plunged a spear into his side and outpoured blood and water. This was done, the gospel tells us, so that the scripture might come true. Not one of his bones will be broken. Now a man named Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin, who had not agreed with the council decision, came forward and asked permission of Pontius Pilate to bury the body of Jesus. A member of the Sanhedrin could ask a special favor of the Roman prefect. We do not know whether Joseph opposed the decision in the council or whether he remained silent. Now, at any rate, having received permission from Pilate, he had the body of Jesus taken down and put into his own tomb. Now, this is the traditional slab of anointing, where the body of Jesus was hurriedly prepared by Joseph of Arimathea and his servants and possibly members of the family and friends of Jesus. There was no time for proper washing and anointing using ointments and perfumes as the process required. When 3 stars can be distinguished in the sky, the Sabbath begins. By that time, the body has to be in the tomb. So the body was hurriedly wrapped and put into the tomb. And the women planned to return and to prepare the body properly for burial when the Sabbath was over. 19th century structure inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is said to be built on the ruins of Christ's actual burial place. A demented caliph hacked the original to bits in the 11th century. Only a commemorative shrine now stands where the tomb of Jesus may once have stood. Here is a typical tomb of the 1st century. Jewish law forbids contact with a dead body. So in this room, mourners could gather, technically separated by that wall from the ritual uncleanness which contact would bring. In the inner room of a tomb, on the anointing slab with spices and ointments, the body was prepared for burial and then wrapped in cloths. Properly prepared, the body was then pushed into one of these niches. These tombs were usually built with a disc-shaped stone, many of them larger than this one and weighing many tons. The stone was held in place by wooden blocks. When the wooden blocks were pulled loose, the stone rolled down, effectively sealing the tomb. It took massive equipment to open it again, unless it were opened supernaturally. The Gospels tell us that very early on Sunday morning, the women came out to the tomb carrying the spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the entrance, so they went in, but they did not find the body of Jesus. All of a sudden, 2 men appeared in bright, shining robes. Full of fear, the women bowed to the ground as the men said to them, "Why are you looking among the dead for one who is alive? He is not here. He has been raised. Remember what Jesus said to you when he was in Galilee. The Son of Man must be turned over to sinful men, be crucified, and 3 days later be raised to life again." The women returned and told the 11 disciples and all the rest. But they thought what the women said was nonsense. Then Peter and John ran out to the tomb. They found the grave clothes lying on the ledge and nothing else. Dr. Meyer, that stone rolled away and the scene disclosed inside has certainly given rise to a lot of ideas about what really happened there. What do you see in the open tomb?
First of all, we have to accept it as a datum of history, and I think it is now a provable fact of history, that on Sunday morning, the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, in which Jesus was buried on Friday, was indeed empty. Now, I think we can prove this as a historical datum, something that has not really been done before, but we have enough evidence now to make that very strong conclusion.
What evidence do you have?
2 sorts of evidence. First of all, the familiar argumentation is strong circumstantial evidence. It seeks to answer that all-important question, where did Christianity begin? And the answer is only one place on earth. Not Galilee, not Judea as a whole, but in one city, Jerusalem. The point is this: in Jerusalem, Christianity could least of all have begun if the decaying body of Jesus were available for view. And all the hubbub that followed when Caiaphas is trying to stop the movement and imprison the apostles, the first thing they would have done, Caiaphas would have done, would have been to conduct an inquiry off to the tomb, move the stone aside, and say, look, there's the body of Jesus. If that would have been available, it would have been a wooden stake through the heart of Christianity right at the start. We never would have heard of the sect again. The other argument, and I think the new argument, which is very significant, is the fact that we have positive evidence in hostile sources that the tomb was empty. Now, in a court of law, this would be called an admission against interest. It's where a point is brought up that somebody hates to bring up in the prosecution because it favors the defendant, but he has to admit it because the whole world knows it's true, and he'd be proven a liar if he said anything else. Well, we have positive testimony to the empty tomb in the rabbinical traditions associated with Jesus, which I think is extremely strong evidence that there was a missing body on Sunday morning, because otherwise it would have been against their particular interest to even mention that fact.
Where do you find that mentioned?
Not only the rabbinical traditions, but also Justin Martyr, one of the earliest church fathers, mentions that as late as the middle of the 2nd century, emissaries from Jerusalem were still fanning out across the Mediterranean world with this naturalistic explanation for the resurrection, namely, the body was stolen. But the point is this: if you were saying the body is stolen or missing, you are all but shouting the fact that the tomb is empty. And that is the whole point. It's a provable historical fact.
In 1978, a city in northwest Italy called Turin displayed a mysterious object that some people have called a proof of the resurrection of Christ. It was only the second time in this century that it had been seen by the public. The relic is a burial cloth containing a ghostly image, life-size, of an unclothed, bearded man. Some believe that it is the very burial cloth that Joseph of Arimathea placed around the body of Jesus 2,000 years ago. At the close of the exhibit, 32 scientists came to Turin with 72 crates of sophisticated instruments and electronic gear in hope of cracking the secrets of the shroud. In the quarters of an old royal palace, the Shroud of Turin was carefully unveiled, and the scientists began their tests. The scientist whose specialty seems farthest removed from the study of earthly phenomena is Don Lynn. Here we are at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, with Don Lynn, the deputy manager of the science office associated with the Voyager space exploration. What is this contraption that stands behind us here?
This is a full-scale model of the Voyager spacecraft, an 1,800-pound robot that is currently exploring the outer planets of our solar system.
Now, how is it that a fellow like you, engaged in this kind of project, should become interested in the Shroud of Turin?
Well, we were asked if we had ever applied any of the space-age processing techniques that we use to enhance and assemble pictures that come back from these spacecraft. We'd ever applied them to images of the Shroud. And that's, curiosity took over from there, and that's how I'm in the project.
Now, you were part of a team of 32 scientists that went to Turin to examine the Shroud. What did you see when you got there?
It's a unique cloth. It's a solid piece of cloth and has a fairly indistinct, it's not a high contrast image of a man, the front and back of a man who appears to have been scourged, beaten, crowned with thorns possibly. There's a heavy blood stain on the side. It has all of the marks that are consistent with the treatment given to Christ before his crucifixion.
Dr. Eric Jumper, one of the chief coordinators for the project, is an authority on the cloth itself.
We're looking here at a photograph of an ancient piece of linen which we know goes back to at least the 1350s. And there are several marks and images on the cloth, the most noticeable of which are these horizontal lines that you see, dark lines. These are actually burn marks that occurred when the Shroud was involved in a fire in 1532. You also see some triangular marks depicted here and there. These are actually patches placed on the cloth to help restore some of the integrity lost at the time of the fire. Also, we see watermark images here and there. Again, water damage done to the cloth at the time of the 1532 fire. But by far, the most interesting images on the cloth are the body images which lie along the center. And you see here hands crossed over the groin, the pectorals of the chest, and the face. And superimposed on this body image are blood images, for example, here in the wrist. And the placement of these images leads one to believe that we're looking at the image of a man who's been crucified. And because of that, the placement of these images, people believe this may be the burial cloth of Jesus. Now, science wants to look at that phenomena, see if it's possible that this could be authentic. And here we see the body image slightly enhanced. We have a better image of this in color. Let me take a look at that. This is much closer to the way the shroud actually looks. We see again the burn marks, the blood on the wrist. You see the hand there, and you can see just how subtle the image on the shroud actually is. If we continue along the shroud, we see again the face, and if we continue further, the back of the head, shoulder blades, buttocks, legs extending out this way, as if a body was placed on the cloth, and then the cloth enfolded over the body. Now, the image as it exists here is interesting, but it is not spectacular. In 1898, Secunda Pia was given permission to photograph the shroud for the first time. He exposed his plates to the image on the shroud, and then he took them back to his darkroom to develop them. He was expecting the normal kind of distorted image that you get with a negative, but instead, he got this rather spectacular image. Somehow, the image on the shroud is itself a negative. Now, this raises a question. If this is a medieval forgery, why would the artist produce an image which could not be fully appreciated until the advent of photography some 500 years later?
In 1389, when the shroud was first put on public exhibition in France, a local bishop had denounced it as a forgery. There were many shrouds of Christ forged during the 14th century, so the bishop was naturally suspicious. It was only the amazing photograph of Secundo Pia 500 years later that led to renewed speculation that the shroud might be authentic. In 1977, a year before the scientific community descended on Turin, Doctors Jumper and Jackson traced the outline of the shroud on a cloth and compared it with a live man of matching height and build. Every body contour matched the image of the shroud exactly. The most startling discovery came when the team created this three-dimensional image from a photo of the shroud. With an image analyzer normally used to provide enhanced photos of the planets in the solar system, Jumper and his associates discovered that the shroud has built into it three-dimensional information. No other known photo possesses such qualities. This discovery electrified the scientific community. More than anything else, it prompted the visit to Turin by the team of 32 distinguished scientists in 1978. For 5 solid days, they worked around the clock. Some photographed, others using sticky tape, took small samples from the surface of the cloth, and then submitted the samples to microscopic study. Bombarding the shroud with infrared, ultraviolet light, and X-ray, they searched for clues to the shroud's chemical makeup. They found that the cloth is hand-woven linen of the type used at the time of Christ, that the image on the shroud lies only on the surface and doesn't penetrate the fibers of the linen. If the image were a painting by a medieval artist, any paint known to man would have soaked into the fibers. Finally, they concluded that what appears to be blood on the shroud does have the chemical consistency of real blood. Well, what do you feel about the shroud after going through all this process of scientific investigation? What does the shroud mean to you personally?
I think what it really means to me, and in the whole investigation, has been fascinating. It's been a tremendous experience. But the important thing about it is the story that's on it. It is a visual, a picture of the passion and death of Christ. All of the wounds, the punishment, everything that he was subject to is all laid out in great detail on the shroud. You can see, in fact, you can feel it. I think that may be one of the most significant things, is rather than hearing it as a story, as something imaginary or that existed at one time, you can stand there and literally feel it.
There's no conclusive scientific proof that the shroud is the burial clothing of Jesus. But the Gospels are concerned with other evidence, supplied by Jesus himself, that he was alive and well. That very afternoon, on a road to a small town near Jerusalem, 2 disciples met with a stranger. He asked them, "Why the long faces?" They said, "Do you mean to tell us that even though you are a stranger in Jerusalem, you don't know the things that happened this weekend?" And he said, "What things?" And they said, "We thought he would have been a prophet in Israel, but now he is dead, and our hopes are dead with him." And Jesus said, "Is that so?" And he told them a long story, beginning with Moses and the prophets, how that the Christ should come and should suffer and then enter into his glory. But still they did not understand. When they came to their home, they said, "It is late in the evening, come and stay with us." But he made as if he would go further. Then they said, "At least come in and have something to eat with us." And he did. And he took the simple bread that they put before him, broke it, and blessed it as was his custom. And they knew him. He did not stay, and they did not stay. That story has been retold and relived through the centuries. In the 40 days following his resurrection, Jesus appeared many times in many places, not only to his closest disciples, but also to over 500 of them at one time. The last time was here on the Mount of Olives, the site of his ascension. After blessing them, Jesus was taken up into heaven. 2 men dressed in white suddenly stood beside the disciples. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why do you stand here looking up at the sky? This Jesus, who was taken up from you into heaven, will come back in the same way that you saw him go into heaven." This is Jesus' world, where he was born and raised, where he lived and moved, where he died and rose again from the dead. These are the kingdoms of that world, along with kingdoms yet to be known in Africa, the Orient, North and South America, Australia, and the Isles of the Seas. Those who came after would carry his message to the ends of the earth. Knowing the awesome task he had given them, he left them with a promise. "Remember, I will be with you always, to the end of the age. Peace, shalom, I leave with you. My peace, shalom, I give to you." The last word comes directly from him. Shalom.